Stay tuned to coverage of the Senate Watergate hearings with witness John Ehrlichman. Highlights a CBS News special report next on Channel 2.
This is Chet Huntley announcing American Airlines' fairest fares of all. There are 3 great ways to fly and save, and they're available right now. You can fly during the day and save 12.5%, fly at night and save 20%, or fly 90 days after making your reservation and save 48%. And each fare can be part of a money-saving vacation package. What could be fairer? For details, call American or your travel agent today. American Airlines' fairest fares of all.
This computer analysis is one of the ways we test the rotary engine before we put it in a Mazda. And this is how we test the Mazda. We want to make sure the car you get is just as good as the engine that comes with it. Mazda, the only rotary engine car in America.
Discover the rotary difference. Test drive the incredible Mazda.
You've seen what steel-belted tires can do. So Montgomery Ward went one better. The steel track-belted grappler radial. Wide enough, deep enough to make driving easy to handle. And if the road comes up with something you didn't see, remember, you're safety belted with steel. The wide, deep, smooth-riding grappler radial. At Ward's Automotive Center, we've got it all.
KNXT, Los Angeles.
Because of the following special broadcast, 60 Minutes will not be presented this evening.
Good evening. A Watergate cover-up is still going on. One or more witnesses to the Senate Watergate Committee are covering, themselves or others. John Ehrlichman swears it must be someone else, that the only thing he or the president had to do with any cover-up was to try and find it.
This is a CBS News special report, the Watergate hearings, the Ehrlichman Testimony, with correspondent John Hart in New York and Dan Rather, Daniel Shore, and Leslie Stahl in Washington.
My new car, a Datsun 610, the most luxurious Datsun of all, with reclining bucket seats, electric rear window defogger, full carpeting, tinted glass, and all that sort of thing. It is, as you can see, a luxury car. But there are a lot of luxury cars on the market. I chose the Datsun 610 because it is a luxury economy car that gets around 25 miles to the gallon. After all, I have a rather long drive each day.
We're in Boston to prove dogs who eat canned dog food will like cheese-flavored Gainsburgers.
I think he likes it. I never thought they'd like cheese. He eats it faster than the canned food.
So what do you think he likes about it?
Imagine the cheese. It's usually quite finicky.
So what type of dog food do you use?
Canned.
What do you think he's doing there?
He likes it. I'm shocked. I never thought he would eat it.
That's the reaction to cheese-flavored Gainsburgers from most canned dog food users we spoke with. Gainsburgers, the canned dog food without the can.
Today, John Ehrlichman told his story of his own inquiry into the Watergate crimes, trying to find out, he said, if the White House were involved. He interviewed a number of people in and out of the White House. One of them was Paul O'Brien, a counsel for the Re-Election Committee. O'Brien telling Ehrlichman what he had heard from Jeb Magruder. Ehrlichman went through his notes of that conversation. Before they got to Watergate, they talked about other dirty tricks earlier in the campaign year of 1972. One of them, a letter of Senator Muskie's that somehow got into a political column.
This involved a cab driver who volunteered at the Muskie headquarters. He had been recruited by a friend of Ken Reitz, who was a former FBI man in Tennessee. And he went into the Muskie headquarters and volunteered and became Senator Muskie's chauffeur and a friend of the family, and went to the Muskie's house for dinner, and soon began carrying all of the senator's mail back and forth.
And he photographed all the mail?
Yeah, he photographed all of the mail.
And who is this friend of Ken Reitz?
The FBI man? I don't know. I don't have his name, but apparently your staff should, because when the Senate staff was looking for someone for this committee's staff, he was approached. And so it shouldn't be too hard to find out who that was. He declined the employment, apparently. One of the pieces of mail apparently was printed in Evans and Novak, and so everybody in the Muskie organization was questioned about it except the chauffeur.
There was another letter that bothered Muskie more. It showed up in a New Hampshire newspaper during the primary campaign there, signed by somebody who could never be found, accusing Muskie of using an insulting word for New Hampshire citizens of French-Canadian descent. Muskie denied it. Ehrlichman's account says it was another dirty trick.
Howard Hunt was a prime contact for Segretti, according to Mr. O'Brien. And I don't know what his source for this information is. I think we've gone out of the Magruder part of the source business now. That Hunt supplied a Florida printer to 3 key Segretti men, one a man named Norton from Los Angeles, and a man from Tampa, and another man from Florida whose names he didn't know. And these 3 people performed dirty tricks.
What were the dirty tricks?
Well, the only one that I have a note of is the note generator of Canuck letter. And presumably he meant by that either Segretti or one of these 3 people were the generator of that letter. And what his source is for that, I do not know. I asked him about Dwight Chapin's involvement in this. He said, well, Chapin will take a bath, by which he meant his reputation or his good repute will be affected. He said someone is working newsmen for more favorable stories. And his source of information on that was a reporter named Lasky, who told him that this was going on. He said that Chapin had had a lot of Segretti contact.
Once again, the testimony got around to John Dean today. Senator Gurney wanted Ehrlichman's version of why Dean became the president's investigator of the Watergate crimes.
As I recall, he said that he wanted Dean to report directly to him. I think he also said that it was taking up too much of your time and also Haldeman's time. Was that ever discussed with you or with Haldeman, the president's decision to have Dean now become the chief investigator of Watergate, February 27th?
Yes, Senator, except chief investigator, I think, is slightly off the track. The preoccupation at that time, as far as the president was concerned, was not in an investigation of the facts, as nearly as it was to get some one person in the White House who was going to look after a number of existing problems with relation to this whole subject matter. And they were primarily the problems of executive privilege and separation of powers, as he saw it then, not a question of whodunit.
Was there any suspicion in your mind that the president appointed Dean to sort of be in charge of Watergate on February 27th because he might have had some suspicion that maybe you were involved, or Haldeman involved, or somebody else in the White House involved?
Well, what the president explained to me was that the central question here was one of executive privilege and the availability of presidential assistance to testimony before the Congress. You recall this had come up in the setting of Peter Flanagan and coming before the Judiciary Committee.
Kleindienst.
And through my notes of meetings with the president, there are 3 or 4 references to the president's strong concern that Haldeman and I were test cases, so to speak, of the availability of presidential assistance to testify before the Congress. And I know there were some questions about his reference to us as principals. I think you have to take it in that setting. We were principals on the question of the availability of assistance to testify. Now, the precedent that might be set by our testifying, he was concerned, would in turn open up Henry Kissinger's testifying and the whole panoply, so to speak, of presidential assistance. And very soon you would have a breakdown of the White House staff system because everybody would be up here testifying like cabinet secretaries do every day, and you couldn't get any work done. So basically, he thought that was where one drew the line, and he wanted Dean to focus very hard on that. I don't think on the 27th that the President was advised of any implication in this matter of either Mr. Haldeman or me. And in point of fact, he continued to be confident through the 30th, I know, and as a matter of fact, on through the 16th of April, because he had a report from Mr. Peterson, the Assistant Attorney General, and from the Attorney General to the effect that neither Mr. Haldeman nor I were criminally involved in this matter in any respect. So, and that was on the occasion of their meeting on that Sunday, which would have been the 15th, wouldn't it? I don't think, particularly the 27th of February, but continuing on through the next 3 weeks, that he had any real concern about that.
By all accounts, March 21st of this year was a busy day at the White House. John Dean said that is the day he finally told the President everything and the implications of everything. John Ehrlichman told about 2 meetings he was in that day. The first with Dean and Haldeman, the second when the 3 of them went to see the President.
Mr. Dean did not report in my hearing what he had told the President that day.
He never mentioned anything about his meeting with the President?
He did not that I can recall at all. We were largely taken up both at that meeting and continuing in the meeting which took place in the President's office afterward, with the question of how to get the story out, number one. How to get White House people to testify fully, under what circumstances, whether they should be made fully available to this committee, waiving all privilege, or whether they should be made available fully to the grand jury and not to this committee at all, whether the attorney-client privilege still existed as to Dean, and he talked to us quite a bit about the law of attorney-client privilege, as I recall, at that occasion. And so it was that setting. Now, Mr. Dean and I got into a difference of opinion at that time about the question of immunity and how that should be handled. As I recall, right around this time, I think...
Now, what do you mean about immunity?
Well, his theory was that the President should negotiate blanket immunity for the White House staff with the Attorney General so that the entire White House staff, lock, stock, and barrel, could testify freely before the grand jury as to any and all facts and clear the air, and everybody be immune from prosecution. That just didn't make any sense to me from either a practical standpoint or a public appearance standpoint. And we got into a difference of opinion on that.
Well, now...
That was again... Pardon me, sir.
Why did he say that?
Well, he was looking for formulae. He had come up with a concept that there ought to be some kind of a commission, an independent commission that would be set up.
But when somebody talks about immunity, obviously they're afraid of ending up in the pokey. Did he say, now we're all going to jail,
No.
so we'd better get some immunity here?
No. He said that he was concerned that people would not talk freely. Now, Mr. Dean is an immunity expert. Mr. Dean told us early in the game that he was the author of the statute, which the Congress eventually adopted, granting immunity to people in certain criminal situations so that they would testify against hires up or co-conspirators or whatnot. And so he gave us quite an accounting of the difference between use immunity and transactional immunity and the various technicalities of this. And he explained that immunity was the sort of the lubricant that was needed in this thing to get people to come forward and to fully tell their stories. Now,
but if everybody is innocent of everything, and
well, I don't think at that
stopped with Liddy, why would people worry about immunity?
Well, I don't think at that stage that there was any necessary assumption on our part that everybody was innocent of everything. I think it was implicit in the conversation that there were liabilities. Now, we were thinking in terms of Mr. Magruder, we were thinking in terms of people at the committee, but Mr. Dean was also implying to us that people in the White House would not come forward and testify freely without immunity. This was a line that picked up, I guess, about this time and then was replayed over and over in his conversations with Mr. Haldeman.
Ehrlichman said the President wanted John Mitchell in on those discussions, so the next day they got Mitchell and they all went to see the President.
When the 4 of us went to the President's office, again, It was largely how to get the whole story out. The question again of the grand jury, of immunity, in John Mitchell's presence, with the president trying these various things out on John Mitchell. And it finally ended up with the president assigning to Mr. Dean that he wanted Mr. Dean to sit down and write out a statement as completely as possible of the facts of this whole subject matter.
This is why he went to Camp David some time later, a few days.
Apparently, and that's what I was told, that he found it impossible to do this job with the Gray hearings going on and the distractions and Mr. Gray making accusations against him and so on.
This really puzzles me. Here on March 21st, that's the day before we're talking about now, supposedly from the testimony we have from Mr. Dean and the testimony we have from Mr. Moore that Dean told Moore. Dean told him all about Watergate. That is, all Dean knew about Watergate. And then there's a meeting in the president's office between the president and Dean and you and Haldeman. And then there's another meeting between the three of you and Mitchell. And then you join the president. This, of course, is the next day. Didn't the president say in any of these meetings, now listen, fellas here, I've heard all about this from John Dean. What gives here? What are we going to do now? What plan do you have? Who's going to do what? How are we going to get this out? We've got to do it. No discussion of that?
Senator, I have great difficulty in believing that the president was told what Mr. Dean says he was told because of the president's approach to this, which I saw in these two meetings. Now, I don't know what Mr. Dean told him. I guess Mr. Haldeman was in one of those meetings, or part of it, and maybe he's in a position to tell you. But
he never told you anything about what transpired in the meeting between the president, Haldeman, and Dean. Haldeman did.
Well, he told me that what Mr. Dean's testified to is not true. Now, I am forced to the assumption by the president's conduct afterward that one of two things was taking place. Either he still confidently believed that the White House was without blame and that Mr. Mitchell was without blame and was acting accordingly, or he was involved in setting a few snares on the trail and was playing it cool because he did not get into any of the January, February, March planning meeting business or the involvement of John Mitchell or any of those kinds of subjects which presumably Mr. Dean had laid all out for him if you're to believe Mr. Dean.
You mean, put it another way, he was in the process of getting the information out from everybody, is that right?
It would be one of the two. And the assignment to Mr. Dean to go and write all this down would fit that hypothesis.
Ehrlichman said that 8 days after that, the president asked him to get into what Dean had been doing. Ehrlichman, quoting the president, is telling him, I need to know where the truth lies in this thing. So Ehrlichman interviewed Dean and got Dean's picture of the situation.
He said the probable scenario for the future will look about like this. May 1st, the grand jury is going to break this case. About May 15th, there are going to be indictments. Then the Attorney General is going to go to Senator Ervin and tell him that the hearings are going to prejudice the new case and that they couldn't possibly get a fair trial. He'll ask that the hearings be held off a month or two until the trial is over, and then he said, in my personal opinion, if they are held off, then there never will be Senate hearings. So I don't know what John Mitchell will do, whether he would take a plea or what he would do under those circumstances. Almost surely, if John Mitchell's indicted, Kleindienst will resign, and he said, I think that Joe Snead ought to be acting Attorney General. Then he said, the U.S. Attorney has assured me that I am not a target, and neither is any other White House person.
Dean testified, as I recall, that there was a discussion between you and him, and I think Haldeman, on the fact that the best way to settle Watergate would have Mitchell come forward. I guess that March 21st? March 21st, counsel tells me. Do you recall anything on that? Whether there was a discussion or an agreement between you that was the best thing to do?
There never was such an agreement. I think that during that meeting and during subsequent meetings, both meetings between Mr. Haldeman and me and meetings with Haldeman, Dean, and me on the 2 occasions that I think we had them subsequent to that, there was a lot of speculation about John Mitchell and his place in all of this. And of course he was not saying anything to anybody at that point in time, and none of us really had a feel for this. I can recall at one of these meetings Bob Haldeman saying, "I wonder if we're taking all this anguish just to protect John Mitchell." He said, and it was a question, it was not an assertion. But I think we all shared at various times that question in our minds as to whether the beating everybody was taking on the subject of Watergate was because he was not coming forward. Now, that was one of the reasons that the President asked me to meet with Mr. Mitchell on the afternoon of, Saturday the 14th of April, to say to him, for the President, that if Mr. Mitchell thought his silence was somehow serving the presidency, that was a misapprehension, that the President didn't want him to sit silent if he knew something, unless Mr. Mitchell felt from his own personal standpoint that was an exercise of his own rights, in which case that was up to him. And I delivered that message to him at that time. But that was a continuing question all the way through this period of time.
Later today, Ehrlichman accused some congressmen of drinking too much. We'll get to that when we come back.
We're taking away Mrs. Fondre's Clorox for 1 month. Mrs. Fondre, how was your wash without Clorox bleach?
Well, my husband cooks in a restaurant and gets wine and food stains all over his shirts, and my detergent just didn't do the trick without Clorox. I also couldn't get the grass stains out of my son's permanent press pants. And look how dingy his undershirts are.
Want your Clorox back?
Just ask my family.
It's true. Every detergent works better with Clorox.
Now, Mrs. Schrank, you wrote that sulfidine worked wonders for your dog's skin problems, and that's a strong statement.
Heidi was scratching and chewing her skin raw. The infection made her suffer so that we thought we were going to lose her. Sulfidine stopped her scratching, healed her sores, so her hair grew back. Sulfidine did work wonders.
Sulfidine for dogs' serious skin problems. Now new Sulfidine medicated shampoo helps remove scales of dandruff and eczema to help keep dogs' skin healthy.
Nationwide Consumer Testing Institute gave 100 luxury car owners a ride, blindfolded, in both a Lincoln Continental and the other leading luxury car. They were all owners of the other make of luxury car. 64 out of 100 said the Lincoln Continental had a more comfortable ride than the other luxury car. The 1973 Lincoln Continental and Continental Mark IV. It is a very good year.
He's usually running around making enough racket for 5 kids. So when he's quiet like this, I know he doesn't feel good. And you know what? I'd rather have the racket. I've got something for your tummy ache. Here.
Pepto-Bismol's good no matter what upsets your stomach. It acts to coat your stomach wall and help keep the irritation away from it. It's a kind of protective coating between the upset and the stomach. Pepto-Bismol's good to have when somebody's a little too quiet.
There were some sermons this afternoon. Senator Weicker preaching on the morality of politics and John Ehrlichman preaching right back. It came up when Weicker was asking Ehrlichman about the undercover work done by Tony Ulazowitz, the former New York cop.
The one principal investigation that I recall, which Mr. Ulazowitz reported to me on, and I'm sorry that I don't have I don't think there were very many major ones of a political nature. My recollection is that a great deal of what he did had to do with Black Panthers and other violent group intelligence, and that's the other thing that stands out in my recollection. But Mr. Ulazowitz was sent to Edgartown to keep track of the development of the Chappaquiddick story. And it slips my mind as to just what the date of that was, but I do recall his keeping us informed on a regular basis of developments as they became available there.
And so that you transmitted this information to the President?
In summary form, he produced almost nothing that wasn't a matter of newspaper reporting, as it turned out.
I'd like to have your concept, and I think this is very much, now we're getting into the real essence of the business of this committee. What is your concept of political information? You see, unfortunately, thanks to the committee to re-elect the President and some of the witnesses that have appeared here, everybody thinks that the senators at this table and others engaged in politics go running around hiring Ulasewicz types to dig up dirt on each other. And I just can't allow that to fly without contesting it, because really it's going to make elections rather interesting in the future if it does. And I wonder if you might, since you were the one that was responsible for hiring this man, and since we've had a description by this man of exactly what his job consisted of, which was dirt, I wonder if you might tell the committee what your concept is of politics here in the United States insofar as this type of activity is concerned.
Well, I think that certainly there is room for improvement in the practice of politics in this country. There's no argument about that. But at the same time, I think that each candidate who contests the candidacy of an incumbent has the obligation to come forward and contest the fitness of that incumbent for office, both in terms of his voting record and in terms of his probity and in terms of his morals, if you please, and any other fact that is important or germane to the voters of his district or state, or the country for that matter.
Do you mean to tell me, in this committee, that you consider private investigators going into sexual habits, drinking habits, domestic problems, and personal social activities as a proper subject for investigation during the course of a political campaign?
Senator, I know of my own knowledge of incumbents in office who are not discharging their obligation to their constituents because of their drinking habits. And it distresses me very much. And there's a kind of an unwritten law in the media that is not discussed. And so the constituents at home have no way of knowing that you can go over here in the gallery and watch a member totter onto the floor in a condition which of at least partial inebriation, which would preclude him from making any sort of a sober judgment on the issues that confront this country. Now, I think that is important for the American people to know, and if the only way that it can be brought out is through his opponent in a political campaign, then I think that opponent has an affirmative obligation to bring that forward.
I don't think anybody realizes what's being done here right now. You definitely have two different concepts of politics in this country meeting head on.
I might say, Senator, that
Let me finish, and then I'll be glad to go ahead and listen to you.
Sure.
I always thought that we settle these matters on the basis of issues, on what you stood for, on a public stance that your opponent took that was a bad stance, how you can present yourself, how you move around in campaign. But to sit here at this moment in time and tell me that we're going to settle our elections on the basis of sexual habits and drinking habits and domestic problems and personal social activities, well, I'll tell you, you stick to your version and I'm going to stick to mine.
Then Weicker got into Dean's charge that Ehrlichman had tried to get the CIA to help in the cover-up. Dean had testified that Ehrlichman told him to deal with General Vernon Walters at the CIA because he was the White House's man in the agency. Walters was deputy to CIA Director Richard Helms.
All right, let's drop back in time again here to the meeting on June 23rd. You're sitting here with the director of the CIA and with General Walters. Now, wouldn't it be logical to address any request of the CIA to the director of the CIA?
Not if you were told by the president that he wanted to work through General Walters.
And let me repeat Mr. Helms's testimony, or his interview, with this committee. Helms had no idea what they were talking about with respect to Mexico, and when he asked, was told, never mind what it's all about. But they wanted Walters to go to Pat Gray right then and there.
The President's instructions were not to me, they were to Mr. Haldeman, and he's going to be your best witness as to those instructions. But my understanding of those instructions secondhand is that the President said that he wanted General Walters and Pat Gray to work this out between them. And that was confirmed to me by the President at a later time, but I didn't know it at the time of this meeting.
And then we also have General Walters' memorandum, which I've read to you, in which he indicates concern over the Watergate investigation in a political sense. And you disagree with that?
The memorandum that you read to me was dated the
do you have a copy of that memorandum?
28th of June, which was considerably after...
5 days after.
And as a matter of fact, after the CIA finally determined that it had no involvement or exposure on the 27th and orally informed the Bureau to that effect. It was then and only then that General Walters sat down and reconstructed these meetings.
So, in effect, your testimony stands in conflict with the versions of that meeting told by, as I've read them to you, of both General Walters and Director Helms.
Yes, sir.
One of Senator Weiker's favorite subjects in these hearings has been how L. Patrick Gray lost his nomination to be FBI director. Today, Weiker read the transcript of a telephone conversation between Ehrlichman and Dean early in March of this year when Gray was testifying at his own confirmation hearings. The transcript of the phone call has Dean saying that Gray's testimony made him gag and that the boss didn't think him smart enough to run the FBI. And it had Ehrlichman saying they should let Gray swing slowly in the breeze. Weiker wanted to know why they let him swing from that day early in March until April 27th when Gray resigned.
Now, it's clear from this taped telephone conversation that you don't think very much of Mr. Gray, unless for some reason or other swinging around in the breeze is a new term of endearment that I don't know anything about. And obviously, from what John Dean says, the President doesn't think very much of Pat Gray. He says that I'm not sure Gray is smart enough to run the Bureau the way he's handling himself. And obviously, Dean says, does he say, he makes me gag. So John Dean doesn't think very much of Pat Gray. What in heaven's name is Pat Gray doing up there at these confirmation hearings as the nominee of the administration?
Well, Senator, I think you'll remember those confirmation hearings and the revelation of the manner in which Mr. Gray responded during the hearings. And I think it's fair to say that there was pretty general disenchantment with the manner in which he handled himself during that time. What I was looking at while you were reading was the various events that took place starting back around the first of the month in those hearings and climaxing on the 23rd of March with Mr. Gray saying that John Dean probably lied to the FBI, and then later privately recanting that charge to Mr. Dean and admitting that it was an overstatement and so on. Now, at this point in time, there was general disenchantment with Mr. Gray's conduct in the process of confirmation. There's no question about it.
But do you mean to tell me if there's this degree of disenchantment that you're going to keep this man on as the nominee and then later on as acting director, in fact, until April the 27th, when in fact it's Pat Gray that steps down? Is that correct?
Well,
there must be some reason. There must be some reason.
I think the situation was evaluated as being perhaps doubtful and painful as it existed, but perhaps more painful to withdraw the problem.
On April 15th, apparently matters come to your attention which involve specifically Mr. Gray admitting that he destroyed the documents. So we can now add 10 more days onto the time when Pat Gray is kept in place. Do you think there's any possibility of the fact that either Pat Gray was kept in place so that there was an acting director of the FBI under the control of you and Mr. Haldeman?
As you say, the president was fully advised of the facts on the 15th. As soon as he decided to move, he immediately replaced Mr. Gray with Mr. Ruckelshaus, who was one of the names that had been on this alternative list for some time. So that it was not a situation, I can't think of any particular advantage to anyone in that delay except to the investigators.
Did the president ask for his resignation?
I think not. I believe that Mr. Gray submitted his resignation and informed the president.
In 8 weeks, the committee has heard some lies, that's for sure. And that when we come back.
Uh-oh. Here comes the old moocher. He knows Grandma's a soft touch. But that piece of stuffing isn't going to help him. Neither is that candied crouton. The trouble is, your dog doesn't know what's good for him. That's why it's up to you to make sure he gets what's good for him with Purina Dog Chow. It's completely balanced to help keep him happy and healthy and full of life. Purina Dog Chow. It's the completely balanced meal.
Sure, I used my denture adhesive this morning, but I'll probably use it again today.
Maybe you need a different kind of adhesive.
Like what?
Use Super Polygrip. It has a plastic formula. Look, here's how it holds. Your gum, your denture. Super Polygrip bonds them together with thousands of interlocking plastic filaments.
Super Polygrip. That ought to hold me.
New Super Polygrip for extra hold. Regular Polygrip for normal hold.
The Watergate hearings, the Ehrlichman Testimony, will continue after station identification. CBS News will cover the Skylab launching tomorrow morning at 7, 6 Central, 4 Pacific Time on CBS.
Tom Kelly, Channel 2 Newsroom. The Dodgers lost, the Angels lost, and in Chicago in the All-Star game, Miami 7 and the All-Stars 3 in the third period.
Newsroom with Joe Benty at 11.
Diet 7-Up. Such a delicious flavor that 4 out of 5 people who try it come back for more.
Go someplace super this summer. Switch to Ralph's, the supermarket with super low prices.
The Watergate hearings, the Ehrlichman Testimony continues.
We don't know who it is, but somebody's lying, under oath, again and again. The testimony of John Ehrlichman and John Dean before him run into each other a number of times, and here are a few of them. John Dean swore that John Ehrlichman told him to get rid of documents found in Watergate burglar E. Howard Hunt's White House safe. Ehrlichman swore he didn't.
I subsequently met with Mr. Ehrlichman to inform him of the contents of Hunt's safe. I gave him a description of the electronic equipment and told him about the bogus cable, the materials relating to Ellsberg, and the other politically sensitive documents. I remember well his instructions. He told me to shred the documents and deep six the briefcase. I asked him what he meant by deep six. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You drive across the river on your way home at night, don't you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, when you cross over the bridge on your way home, just toss the briefcase into the river."
John Dean comes to you and tells you we've got some pretty sensitive papers here, and as he alleges, you say, well, deep six this briefcase. What is your testimony on that?
I did not, Senator. I have no recollection of that kind of a conversation.
On another occasion, John Dean said under oath that John Ehrlichman had told burglar Hunt to get out of the country after the Watergate offices were broken into. John Ehrlichman said under oath that's not what happened at all.
I attended a second meeting in Ehrlichman's office with Colson. I recall Ehrlichman asking where Hunt was. I said I had no idea, and Colson made a similar statement. At that point, before the meeting had started, Ehrlichman instructed me to call Liddy, to tell him to tell Hunt to get out of the country. I did this without even thinking.
I think the first time I heard this story about get Hunt out of the country, and I take it that's what you're referring to, was sometime this year, either late in March or early in April, when Mr. Dean went in my office, told me that I had said this. He said very dramatically, I went to that telephone over there in the corner of your office, and I picked it up and called somebody and sent Hunt out of the country, and you remember that just a half an hour later, we decided that we shouldn't do that, and I went back and called it off.
When did this meeting occur?
Dean is recounting this to me this year, sometime late March, early April, someplace in there. I said, John, I don't think that ever happened. When is that supposed to have happened? He said, that was at the meeting where we talked about Hunt and his employment and his safe, and you remember that. And I said, no, sir, I sure don't.
These hearings have been going on for 8 weeks now, and goodness knows how many lies the committee has heard. Here are some more contradictions we've caught. On executive clemency, John Dean said John Ehrlichman admitted approving clemency for burglar Hunt. John Ehrlichman said executive clemency had been discussed, but he said it should not be offered or even talked about anymore. Dean's testimony put Ehrlichman in on the cover-up. So did John Mitchell's. Ehrlichman says that isn't so. Mitchell swore he hadn't heard about the White House plumbers until June of last year. Ehrlichman swore he told Mitchell about them the year before. Herbert Kalmbach testified he looked Ehrlichman in the eye and asked him if the money-raising he was doing for the Watergate Burglars Fund was all right and proper. And then Ehrlichman looked him back in the eye and said it was all right. Ehrlichman said Kalmbach never asked that. Lying under oath is perjury. People convicted of perjury can get up to 5 years in prison or a $2,000 fine or both for every lie told under oath. And there are some contradictions that agree on facts but disagree on their meaning. Hugh Sloan, who was treasurer of the re-election committee, testified he tried to tell Ehrlichman about payoff money and Ehrlichman wouldn't listen. Ehrlichman said he was only trying to keep Sloan from hurting himself.
I don't believe I, at that point in time, was pointing fingers. I don't believe I mentioned the Magruder remark. I don't believe I mentioned the money to Liddy or Liddy's remark. I was just saying somebody external to the campaign has to look into this because the concern had arisen in my mind at that point of the possibility of the entire campaign organization being involved, and therefore it couldn't investigate itself.
Well, what was Mr. Ehrlichman's response?
His response, I believe he interpreted my concerns, and I'd expressed to him my personal concerns with regard to the money. I believe he interpreted my being there as personal fear, and he indicated to me that I had a special relationship with the White House. If I needed help getting a lawyer, he'd be glad to do that. But don't tell me any of the details that is, I don't want to know. My position would have to be until after the election that I would have to take executive privilege.
When this treasurer of the committee, finance committee, the president came and told you he wanted to tell you about some things that troubled him, you refused to listen.
Well, I thought I was doing that from his standpoint, Mr. Chairman. Duke Sloan has been a young man that I've known well during the time he worked at the White House. I didn't want to see him tell me something before he had talked to counsel that later on was going to prove his undoing.
In addition, Dean testified the White House was obsessed with the Watergate scandal last summer. Ehrlichman testified it wasn't. Dean testified the White House was paranoid about demonstrators. Ehrlichman said it was not. And Dean testified he couldn't get to see the president because Haldeman wouldn't let him. Ehrlichman said sure he could have seen the president because Dean knew how to write the memos that would have got him in.
Polaroid's new SX70. Just touch the button. Now these pictures, developing themselves outside the camera, are hard and dry. Minutes later, you have finished photographs seemingly as real as life itself. The new SX70 land camera from Polaroid.
Make cookouts easier, cleanups neater with Pam. Just spray the grill with Pam, the pure vegetable coating. Then foods won't stick. And later the grill wipes clean with sponge or paper towel. New idea. Spray ice trays before filling. Later cubes pop right out. Spray molds so gelatins come out better. Foods don't stick. Cleanups are easier when you use Pam. Look for Pam in the cooking oil section.
We're going to ask our Watergate reporting team in Washington now, Leslie Stahl, Dan Shore, and Dan Rather, to try and sort out the web of testimony so far. To begin with, folks, what sort of witness do you judge John Ehrlichman to be? He seemed to me to have limitless confidence, today especially.
Yes, I'm not sure confidence is the word. It certainly is true, John, that today was a much smoother day. Of the 4 days so far, this was the smoothest. And I think the reason that it went so smoothly is that the committee finally got down to the ground that Mr. Ehrlichman wanted them to be on. He had been waiting for a long time to be asked about the pre-Watergate and Watergate developments. He had gone into that. He apparently feels that he is innocent in that respect and was very happy to talk about it in the greatest detail. I think if one has to sum up what's happening here, there is a kind of a concealed duel going on before the committee between Ehrlichman and John Mitchell. When you talk, when the subject is raised of the plumbers, which was Mr. Ehrlichman's responsibility and which has been discussed in the committee for the past 3 days, Mr. Ehrlichman tends to become very defensive and says that was a security operation and then becomes rather combative if he's attacked on the subject. If you talk about Watergate, which he apparently feels was not his responsibility, he'll tell you everything he knows, including what I have here is full pages of his interviews, notes of his interviews with a great many people. Mitchell, on the other hand, took the opposite line. Mitchell said it was not Watergate that was the concern, because he apparently felt implicated there, but that it was the so-called White House horrors, by which he meant the things which were under Ehrlichman's control. So that what happens is the two have been conducting this duel using code words of White House horrors and Watergate, and today was a good day, a business-like day before the committee, because the committee asked Ehrlichman a lot of things that he knew about and was very happy to talk about.
Dan, taking Ehrlichman's testimony the full 4 days, I am impressed with one thing. He seems to be living up to the promise he made in his opening statement, and that is that he would refute each and every charge made against him. And he seems to be doing it in 3 ways. He either justifies what he is accused of by saying it was in the interest of national security, as with the plumbers operation, or he pleads ignorance, as in the cover-up, or he says the president ordered me to do it. I'm talking about the tape recordings he made of conversations with Herb Kalmbach, the president's personal attorney. He says, the president asked me to do this investigation of Watergate. I even checked on my good friend Haldeman. He said, the president asked me to do it. And about the CIA meetings, when the CIA was asked to please, or the director of the CIA, or actually General Walters, was asked to go to the director of the FBI and say, please pull back on your investigation. Mr. Ehrlichman says the president asked me to do it. He seemed to have an independent source that was telling him the CIA was involved.
Well, several things we want to keep in mind about John Ehrlichman's testimony. First of all, that this is a well-rehearsed testimony, as was the testimony of John Dean and most of the others who have come up before the committee. What you've had here is Mr. Ehrlichman, Mr. Haldeman, with their attorney, Mr. Wilson, who has been seated beside Mr. Ehrlichman, the man in sometimes dark glasses, and yes, the president and his attorneys. They have been working over a span of time in various ways to coordinate their testimony and get it all together. That's one thing I think we need to observe about Ehrlichman's testimony. Another is, and we haven't said this over 2 or 3 nights, and I think we need to repeat it from time to time, John Ehrlichman has not been indicted for anything, much less convicted for anything. Here's a man who has an excellent reputation as a human being and a citizen of this country with a war record and what have you, coming before the committee. Now, that reputation, as of and including now, is intact as far as the law is concerned. That gave Ehrlichman, I think, a good deal of confidence. It's also true that Ehrlichman is a combative person. He had this reputation around Washington of being arrogant, a reputation we could argue about whether it's justifiable or not, but that certainly was his reputation. He cut that down just a bit. He came across, I think, more combative and less arrogant than he was many, many days at the White House when he was riding high. He did succeed in at least opening a debate with the committee
It seems to me all the other witnesses, including John Mitchell, came before the committee rather quietly and trying to hold their own, and Mitchell's case stonewalled it.
I don't think you remember John Mitchell.
Oh, I remember John Mitchell very well. It seems to me that Mitchell from time to time would spark up, but his testimony, by and large, Dan, struck me as dull. Part of it was partly his voice. He just droned on and on. But Ehrlichman here got on top of this thing, and whether Mitchell, I don't think Mitchell really made a debate of it. I think that Ehrlichman succeeded in at least opening the debate. Now, he may not have won the debate.
Well, Dan, you raised another question, too. How has the president fared at the end of this week? Is the scandal closer or farther from him?
No, I think the scandal is closer to him. The scandal is closer to him. The president, and the polls reflect this, has yet to convince the American people that he's telling the truth.
I mean, as a result of Ehrlichman's
I think
the whole truth.
If the question is put in terms of the testimony,
yes,
it is very clear that John Ehrlichman's testimony has been extremely tender about the president. There is not a thing that Mr. Ehrlichman has said which has damaged the president, and on the contrary, everything that he has said has tended to support the president. I think that if anybody had any thought that the way the thing was falling apart at the White House, that it was going to be every man for himself, and that people who have been as close to the president as John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman were going to come in and sort of save themselves by attacking the president. At least if you can judge by the performance of Mr. Ehrlichman, it has been totally loyal to the president. I heard not one word in 4 days that came from Mr. Ehrlichman that could be described in any way as damaging the president's
I don't know
cause.
of anybody who felt that before this started, that Ehrlichman or Haldeman, before the Senate committee, would say one word against the president.
Well, you remember there was a point we
his
thought they
whole
were
future is
falling
in
apart.
President Nixon's hands. If the president decides to use the vernacular of the White House streets, deep six, John Ehrlichman, he has it in his power to do that, and John Ehrlichman knows that, so I don't find it really any surprise that Ehrlichman wouldn't go the other way.
The point is, did Ehrlichman slip at all in his defense of the president?
No, he did not slip in his defense of the president. It has been a consummately skillful performance, I think, by Mr. Ehrlichman, whether because of rehearsal or not. I mean, the man's command of information, his command of the material, has been most impressive to anybody who sat in the room and watched him as senators move from one subject rapidly to another. He has the stuff in his mind, and when he doesn't have it in his mind, he has it very readily in his notes.
What about this amnesia, though? I mean, Washington has become the amnesia capital of the world, because John Ehrlichman time after time would say, well, I just don't remember, Senator, or I can't quite bring that into focus, or I can't remember it, as with John Mitchell before him. I don't know that that was all that impressive.
Well, Dan, one of the
His amnesia at times was quite impressive.
I think one of the problems is that the committee members are so exhausted from this grueling pace that they are really not equipped to fight back, and he is so well prepared. It's his 1 week or 5 days.
Let's also face the fact that the cross-examination time after time has not been all that strong. The cross-examination by the committee has been rather weak throughout these hearings.
I think you can say that the members and the staffers are just so exhausted that they cannot keep up with it.
But having said that, we also have to give John Ehrlichman and his attorney, Mr. Wilson, full marks. They came in there, let's face it, they're playing on enemy turf, and they walked into the pit and at least managed to open the debate. And in that much, I think you have to say that they have carried the day thus far.
Well, now that we're being also terribly nice to Mr. Ehrlichman, let's note a couple of other things. For example, let's take the point which was noted earlier in this broadcast. John Dean said that they were paranoid at the White House about demonstrators. Ehrlichman said they were not. Well, what John Dean said was to spell out a few things. He talked about the case of one person with a picket sign across in Lafayette Park. And then the president got very angry about that, had somebody go out, and John Dean said the next thing was they were supposed to send thugs over to take care of the man. It is not enough for Mr. Ehrlichman to say that the president was not paranoid. Specific accounts given by Dean can only be contested with other specifics. And I do think Mr. Ehrlichman has been allowed to get away with entering general denials to rather specific things that Dean has said.
Well, John's question before was, how did it affect the presidency and the president and the presidency? It strikes me that, again, the polls continue to reflect that people do not feel that the truth and the whole truth is yet out. I'd be very surprised if there was much change in the polls on that. Do you think so, Leslie?
Don't you feel that, I feel that a lot of this is growing out of the tape situation and the fact that the president seems to be hardening on executive privilege, doesn't want to give the committee what they're asking for. I think that is affecting the polls more than the testimony.
Well, there's also another factor that...
I mean, are we
yes,
here...
I think the polls matter.
Well, polls show what people think at any given time. And
That's pretty important in a democracy.
And at any given time, well, yeah, but they're not going to vote now. But but at any given time, the people may be wrong, and they may wake up to it.
Don't they affect the Congress? Doesn't public opinion affect how these senators will react in that room?
It also affects the president's ability to govern. And what you have working here is that people realize, and we're not talking about just people in Washington, New York, to set that whole thing to rest. People realize that clever lying always requires large amounts of truth mixed into it. Now, certainly, there's been a lot of truth spoken at these Senate testimony and Senate hearings, but as we pointed out in this broadcast, somebody is lying. Now, until it's certain...
Somebody's more likely.
All right. Maybe they all are lying. Well, that's also a possibility. Until it is determined who is lying and who is not, if indeed anybody is not, then the public is not going to buy that, well, let's let this thing go on by.
Dan, we'll move on to another subject before we run out of time. I'd like to know what's happening on this mysterious paragraph 5. Has the committee seen that, Leslie?
They've had a meeting with 2 lawyers from the White House, Leonard Garman and Fred Bazart. Well, only Irvin and Baker and Chief Counsel Samuel Dash and Fred Thompson, the minority counsel. And after the meeting, Irvin was asked, when will the information you gained today be made public? And he said, it will not be made public by me between now and Gabriel's last horn, because it has nothing to do with our investigation. So we may never know what paragraph 5 was.
What does that mean?
Well, that means he's not going to tell us, because I think he feels that whatever he was told is in fact a matter of national security.
Well, the question is, are they going to get together and have that executive session in which they tell about paragraph 5, or is that still up in the air?
Well, they may well have been told about it, but Irvin's not talking.
To be the broader
question. 1 point for John Ehrlichman, then.
I'm sorry, I missed that, John.
I say, so that's 1 point for John Ehrlichman.
Well, I think he scored any number of points this week. What we're left with, and what John Ehrlichman, he built another block on the foundation that was laid by John Mitchell, a block that he just didn't know, that the higher-ups didn't know. Now, again, however, how this plays, how it is perceived is very important. And one of the things that we know about the conspiracy is that a key to the successful conspiracy is the higher-ups don't know, and the lower-ups don't tell them, or the lower downs don't tell them. Now, so far, that is what we have has been painted in the testimony. The higher-ups didn't know, and the lower downs didn't tell them. Now, what the committee, it seems to me, sought to do was to break through that with John Ehrlichman. I don't think they succeeded, or they haven't thus far.
Let's not speak too soon. He's been on for 4 days, and in case it hasn't been mentioned, he's going to be back on Monday.
And I was about to mention that.
And if one were to sum up, you'd have to say that on Watergate, he seems to be very convincing. On the plumbers, he seems to be defensive. And in between, you've got this matter of the cover-up, which I still think there are going to be many questions for.
May I suggest that by the time the litigation is over and the legislation comes out of the committee, that there will still be one question, and that is the president's moral leadership in the White House and on his re-election campaign. That will not be decided by these things.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Dan Shore, Leslie Stahl, and Dan Rather. As Dan mentioned, John Ehrlichman is coming back on Monday for his 5th day of testimony with the committee, and CBS will be putting it on starting at 10 in the morning Eastern Time. For CBS News, John Hart. Good night.
A week ago, we damp mopped this half of the floor with this Mop and Shine product, and this half with Johnson's new step saver with self-stripping action. I'll add black heel marks, a tough floor care problem. Now, a new coat of both products. With self-stripping step saver, the new coat dissolves the old, loosens the dirt, even the black heel marks. Self-stripping step saver cleans deep, shines bright, ends buildup.
I'm Jimmy the Greek, and if you're shaving with Edge, you're a winner. Based on men who made a choice, my odds are 5 to 2 you shave closer with Edge gel than with any plain foam going. Why? Gel makes the difference. Gel lubricates first, then turns to foam. You shave really close because there's much less gamble on nicks and cuts. Long shots are fun in sports, but for a close shave, go with my favorite, Edge.
This has been a CBS News special report. The Watergate hearings, the Ehrlichman Testimony, with correspondent John Hart in New York and Dan Rather, Daniel Shore, and Leslie Stahl in Washington. Hughes Rudd and Sally Quinn. They're the new anchor team that will make your tomorrow morning brighter than today on the new CBS Morning News, weekdays starting Monday, August 6th.
At Montgomery Ward, we've got it all for back to school. Right now, you can lay away 3 dazzling girls' dresses for only $9. No ironing needed. Or choose from Ward's huge selection of girls' denim jeans for just $3.47 a pair. And don't forget Ward's bodysuits, too. A small deposit holds your purchase on layaway till September during back-to-school time at Montgomery Ward.
You are not looking at hamburger. You're looking at Gaines' Top Choice Burger for Dogs. It's made with beef byproducts and real beef, so it's moist and meaty. Look, it holds together just like hamburger, but it's better for him because it has all the vitamins, minerals, and vegetable protein for the complete nutrition hamburger doesn't have. Moist, meaty, Top Choice. For dogs who love hamburger, it's better for them.
KNXT, Los Angeles.
Tonight on the CBS Friday Night Movies, larceny leads to laughter in a computer-age comedy.
Caesar Smith is a thief. Caesar Smith?
Peter Ustinov stars as Caesar Smith, the most successful embezzler in the modern business world, when the CBS Friday Night Movies presents the heartwarming story of a man and his beautiful flute-playing secretary who outwit a computer, rob a giant corporation, and fall madly in love. Maggie Smith co-stars with Bob Newhart.